Welcome to the Tournament Poker Edge podcast, brought to you by TournamentPokerEdge.com, the only podcast dedicated exclusively to poker tournament strategy. Now here's your host, Clayton Fletcher.
Hello once again, everybody, and welcome to the Tournament Poker Edge podcast. I'm your host, Clayton Fletcher, and I am in relaxing, heavenly Atlantic Ocean. I'm basically in the middle of the ocean right now. I'm on a cruise ship. We just left Freeport in Nassau in the Bahama Islands, and we are heading up the coast. That's right, I'm on vacation right now with family and friends, and I'm basically unstoppable, guys. There is nothing in the world that can stop me from bringing you yet another episode of this, the longest running poker strategy podcast in the history of all mankind. We've had this trip planned for a long time, but there's no way I'm going to miss the second episode of the year. After last week, I just announced I'm going to try to do an episode every week. I can't break the streak on week 2, so here we are. Maybe I'll make it a slightly truncated episode this time around, but an episode nonetheless. Last week, we set some goals, including at least 50 episodes of the podcast. And I want to thank those of you who reached out on Twitter at Clayton Comic or in the TPE Discord, of course, and shared your own goals for 2025. I think it's more fun, more exciting, and more motivating if we all hold each other accountable for accomplishing our goals in the new year. So let's do it, guys. If you haven't done so yet, let me know what your hopes and dreams and plans and goals are for this year. And then in December, we can all look back together and see how we did. For those who live in the Denver, Colorado area, I will be performing on January 16th at the Improv. Such a great place to see a comedy show. The Denver Improv, January 16th. And it's not just me. It's basically a 2-for-1 special, as my featured guest is the hilarious Joseph Stapleton. That's right, Uncle Daddy himself. So come see me and Stapes performing in Denver on January 16th. You can get tickets by clicking the link in the show notes. I do hope some of you can make it. It's going to be a great time. All right, also last week we reviewed a hand from day 1 of the WSOP Main Event that I was fairly critical of Eric Lindgren's play. I want to take another look at that hand today, though, and this time we're going to use GTO Wizard. This is the best tool on the market right now to help you improve your poker game. We're going to use a feature called Study, where you can basically look at any spot. You can put in what kind of tournament it is, whether it's a mystery bounty or a PKO, or a quote-unquote normal tournament like the main event. And then you can type in how many big blinds you have and what the action is, and then you can look at all decisions and know what a perfect robot who never goes on tilt or makes any type of mistake would do. And then you can sort of compare that against the decisions that you make and try to use that data to figure out where the holes in your game are. Now, I thought that Lindgren was a little too passive pre-flop, and then I thought he was too sticky post-flop. So let's go back and look at Lindgren's decisions. This ends up being his bust-out hand. And let's use GTO Wizard to see if Lindgren's plays are solver approved. So just to review, Dan Shack opens to 1,300, and next to act is Eric Lindgren with the ace of clubs, queen of hearts, and 20K behind, so right around 35 big blinds. I wanted it to be a 3-bet situation, take charge. Come on, Eric, why don't you just take charge of the hand? You have position, you have a player who probably opens a lot from the hijack, and you're in the cutoff with a pretty darn good hand, ace queen off. So I really wanted him to 3-bet, but let's see what GTO Wizard has to say, and the solver actually likes the call. It's a 94% call and only 6% 3-bet. So points for Lindgren and maybe a demerit for Clayton. So now with 4,800 in the pot, as the big blind also came along And by the way, guys, I had to sort of finagle the hand in the solver to get us to the river because the solver really only deals with heads-up situations. And as we know, in reality, 3 players saw the flop and not just 2. So what I've done instead is I pretended that Lindgren was the original raiser, and then the big blind, Luke Martinelli, called the raise. And I think that this will be, an approximate workaround for the situation. So we're pretending that Eric was the original raiser from late position, and the big blind was the only caller. So the flop came 9 of diamonds, 4 of diamonds, 4 of clubs, and the big blind checked, and Lindgren decided to bet 1,000, which I also feel would be totally fine heads up. But remember last week, because I knew that there were actually 2 opponents, I didn't really love Eric's decision to bet this flop. But since we can't do that with the solver, we're just going to look at it from a heads up point of view. And in that case, the solver loves the decision to bet, betting ace queen on this board 87% of the time. Then Martinelli check raised to 2,800, and when the action got back to Lindgren after Shaq folded, Lindgren decided to make the call. I believe I was critical of that play last week. Also factoring in that the check raiser had 2 opponents, and of course with the solver limitations, we've only got 1 opponent. I think in that case, I would lean more towards a call, although last week I did say fold because of the 2 opponent. But let's see what the solver does heads up, and it turns out the solver calls the check raise 94% of the time. So to recap, the flop 9-4-4 with 2 diamonds, check to Lindgren, he bets 1K, solver makes that play 87%, so that's great. And then when you get check raised, we're supposed to hold on and be sticky and call the check raise 94% of the time. So far, so good for Eric Lindgren. Now with 10,400 in the pot, the turn comes the deuce of spades, and Martinelli continued his aggression, betting 3,000, about 1/3 of the pot. And Lindgren made the call, and I remember being very critical of this last week. I really thought that it was time to get out of Dodge, save your chips, live to fight another day. You don't even have a diamond. What are we doing? I remember disapproving of Lindgren's decision here and wanting to get out. So let's see what GTO Wizard has to say. And the solver does fold 15% of the time, which is a surprisingly low percentage to me, because we're calling 78% of the time. So I have to say, Eric Lindgren's play is solver approved. By the way, we're raising the rest. So you have ace queen with no diamond, and you're just going to put in a raise some small percentage of the time. And just as an aside, I think those are those little bluffs that most of us never find, right? Like we feel like ace queen's a perfectly good bluff catcher. Why should we turn it into a bluff? Why would you bluff with a bluff catcher? Just call the bet and hope ace queen is good. But yeah, the solver does mix in occasionally a bluff raise. And interesting to note, we actually do that more often when we don't have a diamond than when we do. So think about that for a second. All right, now with 16,400 in the middle and Lindgren with just under a pot-sized bet behind, the river comes the deuce of hearts, and Martinelli shoves. At this point, I said, come on, Eric, fold your hand. You're hoping for a chop at best. Get out of Dodge. It's over. You've tried. You've fought. It's time to wave the white flag and surrender. But GTO Wizard says not so fast, Clayton Fletcher. It's a 75% call. So I wanted to fold. The solver only folds 25% of the time. But I do think that if you're going to have a 25% fold, the main event is probably one of the times when you should fold in this spot, just because the structure is so good and the blinds go up so slowly and it's 2-hour levels and everything. There's no reason to take these marginal spots in order to just avoid being exploitable. Just my opinion. Of course, Eric Lindgren's been in poker for 20 plus years, and obviously he knows a thing or two about the game. He's got 2 bracelets. I'm not saying that I know more about poker than he does, but I do feel that with all the factors that we need to consider, calling for the chop here just feels wrong. Even when the solver says we should, I think I would put the main event into my 25% folding range, if you will. If we put tournaments into a range, I guess. Anyway, guys, I found this fascinating because we were talking last week about leaks that I've discovered that I have, and it turns out one of my biggest leaks is that I'm not sticky enough post-flop, maybe a little too bluffable, and I really wanted to throw this ace-queen away. Never mind that Lindgren ends up busting out on this hand and that he loses the pot. That's not really what we want to look at. What we want to look at is how do you play in such a way that you're hard to beat. And I think that I need to learn when and where to be stickier. And if you want to learn more about what's wrong with your game and where your leaks are that you need to plug, we've got a great deal for you. We've got an affiliate link in the description of this podcast. You can sign up for GTO Wizard, get 24 hours for free where you can play with it, see what it does, and try all the different features. And then when you're ready to purchase, because you click that link, you will save 10% on your first purchase at GTO Wizard. And here is that link. It's gtowizard.com/p/TPE. Somebody asked me recently, by the way, what that little P in the middle of that link stands for, and it's partner. Affiliate, partner, these are the words we use. So they're a partner of ours, and we are partnering with them to bring this great offer to you. And I hope that some of you will take advantage of it. If you start now, then by the time the World Series of Poker rolls around this summer, you will be playing much better than you did last year. All right, guys, let's do one more hand from the main event. I do want to get back to my family vacation, but let's look at day 1D. They kind of focused on a table that included two people I know. Number one is former world champion Joe Cata, and I've tangled with Joe on the felt many times. You guys know Joe, he's a beast. He won the closer in the same year that he final tabled the main event for the second time. I mean, the guy is an absolute crusher. He and I have gone at it on the felt many, many times, including 2018, which is the year that I finished in 28th place in the main event. I believe Cata got 5th that year, and they showed us playing together on TV quite a bit on Poker Go. The other player that I recognize, or at least I think I might recognize, is a guy named Larry Rayo. Now, I went to high school with this Larry Rayo. I think it's the same guy. It's hard to know because it's been quite a while since either of us were in high school and we don't look the same. But what's bugging me about Larry Rayo, if you are the same Larry Rayo that was in my high school when I was a little boy, okay, maybe not a little boy, a teenager, but if it's the same Larry Rayo, I have one question for you, sir. Why did you grow up to become the type of person who wears a Yankee hat? Everybody knows we grew up in Baltimore. There is no excuse for anyone who was born and raised in Baltimore to ever wear a Yankee cap in public or in private. So if that's the same Larry Rayo that went to my high school, I need an answer from you, sir. Why were you wearing that disgusting New York Yankees baseball cap at the poker table? By the way, if it's a different Larry Rayo, I apologize for what I'm saying. All right, so let's get to the hand here. Actually, Joe Cata and Larry Rayo are not even involved in this hand, but they were at the table. The action begins with a player named Eric Roberts, an older guy, looks around 60, maybe from the Midwest, that kind of style. He's in second position, or as you may call it, UTG +1, and Eric Roberts opens to 800 with the ace of clubs, 9 of clubs. So let's play this hand from Eric's perspective. So far, I like it. You guys know I tend to be tighter from early position than maybe what a solver or a chart would recommend. And that's because I like to be looser from later position than those charts and solvers recommend. But it's totally fine to open any suited ace from any position in a tournament when you have 150 big blinds, as Eric Roberts does in this hand. So he just min raises to 800, which has probably become the standard at their table. I mean, look, you're not going to get that many folds from the big blind when you just min raise and there's an ante and everything, but it's totally fine. When we have this many chips, it really doesn't matter that much if we make it 800 or 1K, whatever. So he makes it 800 and the action folds all the way around to the big blind, Levi Klump, kind of a Vegas grinder, small stakes, medium stakes grinder who lives in Las Vegas. And he makes the call, a younger guy, calls from the big blind. And now these two are going to see the flop. They've got over 50K in their stacks. And the flop comes King of Spades, 6 of Clubs, Deuce of Spades. King, 6, Deuce with 2 spades and 1 club. Hero with the Ace of Clubs, 9 of Clubs. So we've got an overcard and a backdoor flush draw. Klump checks. Should Roberts fire out a C-bet? I do like C-betting in this spot. We're going to represent that king. We'll probably be able to get folds from hands like Queen Jack, Jack 10, just hands that totally whiffed. We're not going to get folds from any pair or any flush draw, at least not with a small bet on the flop. But I do like a small bet on this flop. I think we're going to bet very often on this board, so we need to make it a smaller bet for that reason. The less often you bet, the bigger your sizing should be in general. So with 2,200 in the middle, I would put in like 700. That should get the job done when our opponent has completely whiffed. But Eric goes chunkier. He puts in 1,100, half the pot here, which feels unnecessarily large to me. But he fires 1,100, and then Klump makes the call. So let's try to do some hand reading from Eric's position here. Mr. Roberts has put in half the pot, and the big blind has called on King, 6, Deuce with 2 spades and 1 club. We have the Ace, 9 of Clubs. I mean, the first thing I would think is he's got a piece of this, right? Maybe a 6. Maybe he's got a pair, like pocket 7s, pocket 8s possibly. Obviously, it could be a flush draw. Or possibly a gut shot, maybe a hand like 5-3 suited or 5-4, looking to fill an inside straight draw. So, yeah, that's kind of the range I would look at. It's also possible he's got a weak king and doesn't want to check raise with it. But yes, if there is an advantage to betting bigger than I wanted to bet, it's that it kind of narrows your opponent's range more versus a much smaller bet. The big blind's calling range should be much wider. So the fact that he called a larger bet kind of narrows that range and makes me think he's got something relatively strong. So moving on to the turn, it comes the 5 of Clubs, which gives us the nut flush draw, but also completes the 4 tray. One possible gut shot on the flop. Klump checks again. And I think that, to me, this is a mandatory bet from Roberts. Capitalize on the fact that the amount of equity we have has increased. This is a great card for us. We've got the nut flush draw now. We've got an overcard, which is probably live, and we've got nut clubs. I would overbet in this situation. There's 4,400 in the middle. I would probably put in 6,500 here. I think I would do this with a very strong hand, like a straight or a set, 6-5 suited for 2 pair. So I need to have some bluffs that I want to overbet as well. And I think that the nut flush draw is actually the best bluffing candidate for this play. And the reason why is there's some possibility that Klump also just picked up a flush draw. And in that case, we want to build this pot as big as we can in case we hit another club on the river, and then we can win a really big pot, possibly even stack a man if he makes a very strong second best hand on the river. So that's why I really like overbetting on the turn. It sets up a lot of good dynamics for the river. Also, if we miss the river, we have the option of betting big again and trying to push him off of a king. I mean, even this overbet on the turn, does he really want to call with like a suited king with no kicker, something like king 8? Does he really want to put in a whole lot of chips on 4th Street, not knowing what I'm going to do on the end? I like to make my opponent's lives hard, and that's why I want to overbet this turn. However, Mr. Roberts decides to check behind, and when he does that, it makes me really dislike his sizing on the flop. You know, if you're going to bet half the pot on the flop and build this pot up in that way, I think it's much better to continue with the aggressiveness now that you've built a pot worth winning when you pick up that beautiful backdoor flush draw on the turn. So I really don't understand betting half pot on the flop and then getting such a great card and not following through. Anyway, Roberts does check behind, and now still with 4,400 in the middle, the river comes the 5 of spades, which not only pairs the board, but also completes the front door flush draw, and Klump checks again. Is this a spot for Roberts to bet on the river? Should we bluff? I think it's best to check behind. There's some chance ace high is good, although I don't know how strong of a chance that is. I think because we didn't bet on 4th Street, we should not try to steal this pot on the river. Also, like I say, we do have some showdown value with our ace high. But more than that, just generally, it's way easier for people to bluff catch on the river than it is on the turn. So if we don't fire on 4th Street, I think our chances of having success on the end are diminished, especially when all he has to do is flick in a chip and find out what we have. You know, you can see it for one bet. The hammer of future betting is what Dan Harrington calls this in his brilliant book from 20 years ago, Harrington on Hold'em. It's the fact that when you bet on 4th Street, your opponent has to worry if you're going to follow up with another barrel on the river. And Eric Roberts agrees with me this time. He checks behind, and then Klump wins the pot with the Jack of Hearts, 6 of Hearts, so he flopped middle pair, called that half pot bet on the flop, and then from there, Eric Roberts made his life easy, and he ends up scooping a nice little pot early on in the main event. And that'll do it for this episode. Hope I see some of you guys in Denver, January 16th. And for everyone here at Tournament Poker Edge, I'm Clayton Fletcher. Thank you so much for listening.
I wanna hold them like they do in Texas, please. Fold them, let them hit me, raise it, baby, stay with me. Luck and intuition, play the cards with babes to start. And after she's been hooked, I'll play the one that's on her heart.